When I was a stupid, impressionable kid, Nintendo unfortunately served as my introduction to gaming. Growing up, their games such as Super Mario 64 DS, Mario Galaxy, Majora's Mask, among various other titles, taught me everything I would grow to love about gaming and would ruin my life. The 64 DS was one of the most influential games I've ever played. It was this giant mystery box that showed me what games were truly capable of. Needless to say, I latched onto this company, and time again, they showed me new creative ideas and pushed the boundaries of gaming. As I grew up, I got to see new series be born, become friends with people who are also fans of Nintendo, and make more memories with their games that I would cherish for the rest of my life. Yeah, that's right, I'm a Nintendo fan. I don't know what could have possibly given that away. Despite their countless humiliating missteps, I always stood by this company. If there was only one Nintendo bootlicker on this whole damn planet, then that was me. They've been on top of the world several times now, however, there have been multiple occasions where they've severely faltered. Being a fan of the company during the Wii U era was like saying, yeah, I do only have one testicle. But even then, I have a lot of great memories from that time period, and it was really fun if you ignore the fact that if you only owned a Wii U, then you had no friends. But hey, they still made great stuff during this time. Mostly. It helped that Nintendo had a way of bridging the gap between them and their consumers. The introduction of the Nintendo Directs and their charming E3 productions helped develop an endearing feel around what would otherwise be another soulless corporation, even if they still acted like one. To pop off the rose-tinted glasses for a second though, while I have a lot of nostalgia for this era, it's important to dial that back a little bit. Nintendo was not by any means ever a perfect company, and anyone who wants to claim that is a Nintendo fan. Or in other words, stupid. That and near the end of the Wii U's lifespan, they were horribly misguided and disconnected from the fans that they seemed like they previously wanted to establish a connection with. Calling yourself a Nintendo fan in 2016 was the anti-Riz dialogue option. I always wanted to see Nintendo rebound and actually stand a chance against Microsoft and Sony. I had watched a company I loved have more misses than a guy trying to pee straight into a water bottle, and I was ready to finally see them succeed again. And then they did. The announcement of the Nintendo Switch was probably the rawest thing any Nintendo fan had ever seen. A video game system you could play at home and on the go? Wow, now that's a revolutionary idea. Still not quite as revolutionary as the marketing for this new hybrid console being actually good and making the effort of appealing to people who are above the age of 9.
Hot buttered popcorn, that's a deal!
Kill yourself!
The Switch presentation that followed in early 2017 was what really brought the company back on their feet, with the announcement of several games that people actually asked for. Breath of the Wild, the long-anticipated new Zelda game, served as the console's huge launch title, and in the following months the library grew greater with the likes of Splatoon 2 and Super Mario Odyssey, which while we all know it's no masterpiece, it was still a refreshing return to the series' 3D collectathon days. This strong starting year for the Switch ended up cementing it as one of the best-selling consoles ever. And over the course of the next 6 years... Wait, it's 6 years old. It's 6 years old. And over the course of the next 6 years, it brought Nintendo back as a major player in the gaming industry. And yep, that's the whole story. Nintendo made a banger console, released countless peak fictions, and they're an awesome business and the best video game company ever. But there's something very important about that last sentence that I need to tell you. I lied. Nintendo has done a lot of cool stuff during the Switch's lifespan, however, for every step they take forward, they take 2 backwards, and in some regards, they either haven't advanced at all or regressed backwards. This is not an unpopular opinion, it's a common sentiment between me and a lot of other people that there's something missing about the company we once loved. Not that they were always consumer-friendly, this may come as a shock, but Nintendo is a business, and the main thing they care about is money. I know, what a shocker! But now, more than ever, with them being back at the top again, their negative side has become far more noticeable. And anytime they do something stupid, there's always a horde of hygienically challenged individuals ready to shield them from all forms of criticism because look, new Zelda, oh my gosh, no, look, new Smash character broken, new Smash hype, and broski, I'm just tired of it all. So you know what? For the next however many minutes I feel like, I'm gonna just tell you why I don't really like the business I used to idolize so much as a kid. I think my main reason is that my IQ has increased a lot ever since I was 13, and I think that alone could probably explain why I'm not a Nintendo fan anymore. No, I didn't say I was done yet.
Oh, brother!
I think we can all agree from a conceptual standpoint, the Switch is a pretty rad piece of hardware. A hybrid console that you can bring on the go that's still cheaper than the competition is freaking cool no matter which way you swing it. The wide variety of different control methods at your disposal in the handheld mode give you a bunch of different options to make playing the console more comfortable for you. I mean, I almost exclusively play in handheld mode. There's nothing quite as cozy as playing a big RPG while chilling out in bed in the middle of the night without the hassle that can come from playing on a TV. Such as having to sit next to a TV. However, there are several caveats that come with this comfort, my most complicated issue being the hardware sucks balls. This thing's cheap in more ways than one. At launch, the Switch was infamously defective and had some of the stupidest problems I've ever seen from a console launch before. I thankfully never encountered any of the giant technical hiccups you see online, but I remember the first model me and my brothers got had a yellow line of dead pixels the very first day we got it. I've never had a tech issue like that before with any console I've owned in their entire lifetimes, much less on the first day of owning it. This was addressed over time, and as far as I'm aware, there aren't any more situations like this. In fact, the standard Switch model got updated with a better battery life after a year or two of being on the market. But while that's all fine and cool and now and how and wow, the controllers aren't. The Joy-Cons are held together with spit, rubber bands, and those Elmer glue sticks you used in first grade. On a conceptual standpoint, they're cool controllers with a variety of different features and multiple ways they can be used, but also that's undermined by the fact that they're more dysfunctional than Chris Chan's penis. There's no other controller I can think of that suffers from drifting more than these. I've personally had about 3 or 4 Joy-Cons drift when it should be uncommon for even one to do that. Meanwhile, they're still being sold for $80 because they're filled with superfluous trash nobody cares about, like HD rumble and an IR camera that was used a grand total of like 2 times. They can barely do the sole function they were designed to do, but these otherwise cheaply made controllers get their prices jacked up because of gimmicks nobody asked for and in reality don't add much to the experience. While I do appreciate how free repairs are offered, I don't think that excuses the problem at hand, considering that I shouldn't have to send in multiple defective controllers to begin with. And if you own a Switch Lite, then well, I guess you're just adopted. By the way, the GameCube controller I've used ever since I was 4 and has had to suffer hundreds of hours of Smash Bros. Still works perfectly fine to this day, so I don't know what's stopping them from making a good controller nowadays. That's enough about the hardware though. You know what else isn't good? Their online service.
More games, more features, more fun.
Oh, look at
As we all know, back during the Wii U days, Nintendo had pretty great online. Though saying that implies you microwaved your head at one point in your life. Nintendo's always had the worst online service out of every major gaming company, possibly due to their games being more single-player oriented. But man, whenever it came to games like Smash Bros, finding a good online match was more difficult than finding my dad. The silver lining to this, however, was, well, at least it's free. Nintendo Online was like the unemployment check of gaming. Even if it was poor, at least you didn't have to do anything to use it. Going into the Switch, I was hoping that would be a similar case, but when their new paid online service was announced, I went into cardiac arrest. $20 a year? How the fuck am I expected to pay $20 a year to cuss out children in Mario Kart? But you know, maybe this was a good thing. No, it wasn't. If the customer is expected to pay for Nintendo's online now, that must mean that they're going to improve the quality of it to justify the price tag. Well, it's been said again, and again, and again, and again, but that's because they keep giving me more reasons to make fun of it. Nintendo Switch Online is bad, and it keeps getting worse. Paying $20 to $50 a month so that I can have the privilege of playing Smash or Mario Kart online with dookie peer-to-peer connections is borderline insulting. And it's not really like most people have a choice, considering the longevity of a lot of multiplayer-focused games hinges almost entirely on online play. So it's either fork over some extra cash or the game you also already spent money on loses some of its value. And none of the extra features that come with being an online member are selling points either. Infrequent game trials, special offers that bless you with the ability to purchase overpriced controllers that have less utility than the other overpriced controllers the console already uses, and access to an inconsistently updated library of old titles. Admittedly, I like having all of these games readily available to play to me in one application, and the online play, while being pretty bad on occasion like you'd expect, it's still pretty fun and a lot less of a hassle than using a program like Parsec that needs me to verify my account every 2 seconds like it has dementia.
You know who else suffers from...
However, considering the sheer amount of games Nintendo owns and could easily put on the service, compared to the actual amount of games on it, it's a very underwhelming service. And they only ever update the libraries with like 2 games nobody has ever heard of once every presidential term. How many Caveman SNES games are there? It's the gaming equivalent of me opening up this script, writing 2 sentences, and then getting distracted and going back to procrastinating. Something I've never commented on before though is the expansion pass membership. The main draw of this one being the access to N64 games, and Genesis ones too, I guess, but the Genesis doesn't have Mario, so nobody cares. Being able to play N64 games on the go sounds pretty awesome until you remember the Steam Deck exists, and also when you take into account the numerous emulation issues that come with these versions of the games. They've been heavily documented ever since the launch of the expansion pass, and I don't have much business commenting on it myself, considering that I actually put my foot down and said no. I refuse to buy this. Access to some N64 games and various DLC, some of which I already own, does not justify the $50 price tag when there are far better gaming services that get you way more bang for your buck. I hate that nowadays Nintendo's classic titles are mostly locked behind this trash online service, and since it's subscription-based, it's not even like you actually get to own the games. The Virtual Console on older systems was missing some noteworthy titles as well, but they were far more robust than this new library and weren't stuck behind a paywall for something you might not even care about. I will never be able to understand why Nintendo refuses to make more of their old games available on the Switch. While there have been some ports here and there, the fact of the matter is that a grand majority of their GameCube, Wii, and now even Wii U and 3DS games have been lost to time with no way to officially purchase them without mortgaging your house.
Dear God!
Yet despite their stubbornness to port these decade-old games, they're cracking down on emulation harder than anyone else in the industry. If you downloaded a ROM for Yoshi's Cookie, you are a goner, bro. The classic game collecting market is a total shit show right now, and companies like Nintendo fuel that fire. They have nothing to gain from telling people to either pay $100 for an old GameCube game or suck it up. When the game in question is literally out of print and you don't have any other means of purchasing it, then you have nothing to lose when somebody emulates it. And by the way, I blame them for any sort of negative stance on emulation. They will paint emulation in a light that makes it seem like the only people who emulate are evil pirates who want to steal video games. And you know what? Screw it. Piracy is awesome. I think the FBI heard that. Because I want to sound smart, I'm going to quote Gabe Newell real quick. In his own words, a rushed video game is a bad game, and a video game is forever a video game. Wait, I think I got it mixed up. But essentially, he once said that people only pirate games for the sake of convenience and not necessarily because they don't want to pay money for them. Pirates will pirate less if more games are actually available and priced affordably too, and not plagued with crappy DRM that gives people who did pay for the game worse experiences than if they pirated it instead. This isn't just a Nintendo problem, this is sort of an everyone issue, but Nintendo is barely doing anything to help with this situation. Who wants to make money off of old games? Who wants to port old games to new platforms? The pain Nintendo goes through in porting old games to modern consoles must be worse than giving birth, because after they're done making one port, it'll probably be another decade before they say, hey, we should do that again. So because of that, emulation is a necessity when it comes to game preservation and actually getting to experience old titles that are no longer available. For the longest time, I was brainwashed into thinking that emulating a game was a grave sin that would make Miyamoto go bankrupt and it would be all my fault. But then I realized that if I wanted to play old video games officially, then I would go bankrupt. So, I mean, It was either me or him. And now more than ever, with the loss of the Wii U and 3DS eShop, countless games are getting lost to time, and it's not solely Nintendo's fault for this happening. After all, they didn't make every game that was exclusive to those platforms. But this stubbornness to re-release old games in an adequate state for an affordable price makes the emulators that they have a hate boner for all the more appealing. Recently, they've been releasing a couple of old games like Metroid Prime, Pikmin 1 and 2, and Dark Moon thinks he's on the team. And that's good. Very good, in fact. I was just about to play the Pikmin games on Dolphin, but guess what? Now that it's accessible on modern hardware, you get my money, Nintendo! Good for you! You got 50 smackaroos you wouldn't have gotten out of me otherwise! Now we can talk about the price being a little higher than I'd like considering this game was made before I was born, but I digress. Having to beat off Nintendo for re-releasing a GameCube game is like calling somebody based because they said 9/11 was bad. Just imagine what'll happen whenever they add more than 2 themes to the Switch's menu.
Oh my god, you guys, Nintendo just updated the Switch to version 14.0. I literally ran home, I'm sweating up a storm. We gotta check this out because it basically adds folders to the Switch.
Just do it more. A lot of these games are a perfect fit for Switch and it's practically free money for Nintendo. It's a win-win. If there's one takeaway to be made from this segment, then it should be Nintendo, please port Fortune Street to Switch. It can be a lazy port that adds jack squat. I do not care. I will pay $60 for it. Just please put Fortune Street on Switch, please! I want to play more of their old stuff, because a lot of their modern games are just really hit and miss. This is probably going to be the most divisive part of the video, and I can't blame you if you disagree with some of my takes here. Don't get me wrong, the Switch does have a solid first-party library for the most part. Mario Odyssey is not without its very glaring issues with the bloated collectible count, but I still think it's a great breath of fresh air for 3D Mario. And Kirby and the Forgotten Land was a pretty good step in the right direction for a series that was beginning to show signs of stagnation. But in comparison to the Wii U's library, the Switch has got nothing going for it. The Wii U has the best game lineup out of every Nintendo console, and you literally cannot argue otherwise. It had classics such as Nintendo Land, New Soup U, Amiibo Festival, Star Fox Zero, Air Bud, Air Bud 2, Air Bud and Raccoon. Now look, the last thing I want to do in this video is cherry pick and make it out like, oh, Nintendo doesn't innovate the way they used to, they lost their charm, because that isn't entirely true. Time and time again, people will complain about one thing, whether it's a movie or game, for how terrible it supposedly is, then 700 years later, when it gets a follow-up, they'll go back and say, you know, this new thing sucks, this old thing that I definitely didn't trash on back when it was released was so much better, the Wii U library was peak fiction. No. You're wrong. And you really can't argue otherwise. 2015 and 2016 were incredibly messy years for Nintendo where, while not all of the stuff they made was bad, the best way to describe it was the who asked period. There's still several great Wii U games. I mean, why do you think half of them got ports? But I'm not about to tell you about how much better things used to be, because that simply isn't true. What I will say, however, is that for every good first-party Switch game, there are about 3 or 4 mediocre or bad ones. Outside of the couple I mentioned earlier, personally, I'm incredibly underwhelmed by a lot of Nintendo's recent outings. ARMS was an unfortunate case of trying to breathe life into a new IP like how they managed to do with Splatoon a few years prior, and while I think the game gets unfairly dogged on, it is relatively simplistic and uninteresting. I respect the company actually trying something new, but the game's appeal wore off very quickly in comparison to Splatoon, which just had better gameplay and a more fleshed out world. There's Yoshi's Crafted World, which...
Yoshi's Crappy World?
And I'm aware that I'm probably gonna get crucified for this next one, but man, I just gotta say it, so Jesus, make me some room. Luigi's Mansion 3 was disappointing. The level design is not an improvement over Dark Moon at all. It is literally the same linear point A to point B mission structure that plagued that game and took away from its exploration, with the only difference being that there's no level select, so that means the missions are definitely gone, guys. And I'm not gonna make it out like the first game was some amazing non-linear game, because no, all things considered, that game is pretty linear too. But the difference is that the mansion was cool and interconnected. There were reasons to backtrack to previous rooms that didn't involve pointless MacGuffins that two people will care about. There was so much more life to the mansion that I think the hotel lacks. Each floor is completely disconnected from the last, and while some of them are pretty fun and have solid puzzles, a lot of the time they really drop the ball. There are several floors with cool ideas that are totally wasted because of how short they are or because they're completely dedicated to a boss encounter and that's it. Backtracking is a chore to pad out the game with these unnecessary polterkitty encounters that completely kill the pace of a game that was already a decent length. When the original was short and sweet but used its time so effectively that I still love revisiting it even to this day. And that sucks to say all this too because I want so badly to love this game. Out of every title Nintendo has released this generation, this one is oozing with the most charm. The cutscenes are full of life and the sheer variety of voice clips for the characters adds so much more than you'd expect them to. Despite the intent of Mario and Luigi being these lovable, charming characters, in a lot of games they have the expression of a pet rock, so to see them emote and speak so much in this game reminded me of why I loved these characters so much as a kid. I just wish the game was better, but all of those I just listed off, those are just games that I don't care about. What now? We can talk about the holy grails of Nintendo's modern library, or better yet, their dead horses. The finish it later game. I don't even think I need to talk about this. I wrote up this giant section for the video and it just feels so redundant since everyone else has already talked about it. And even if you don't know what I'm talking about, you've probably noticed it at some point. Nintendo releases a smaller title like a spin-off or something and it's lacking in content, it's very underbaked. And then over the next few months they add stuff like new characters or stages and whatnot to try to make the game more appealing and extend its longevity. And it doesn't work. So these games have a bare bones launch and then after you've exhausted the little content they have to offer and lose interest, they finally get more content like 2 months later. So you play that new content for like 2 days before it gets dried up again and it's never enough to hold most people's interest for any more than a couple of days. They did this with the modern Mario sports titles and you can like those games for their core gameplay. However, I think we can all agree that it would be better if these games were delayed and released whenever all of the content was finished so that on day 1 you would pay for a full complete package that would hold everyone's attention for longer. I mean, for crying out loud, Tennis Aces didn't even have a proper opening cutscene for its story mode until an entire year after launch, and it was cobbled together with reused out-of-place voice lines from older games. I can't even.
You X-Men. You X-Men. Oh, shut up.
It is so clear that these new titles just don't have the same care and polish that was put into the older ones. If you showed them the roster of Mario Super Sluggers on the Wii and told them to put that into one of the modern games, the devs would probably have a hernia. And I cannot fathom why they keep rushing these games because as far as I'm aware, Nintendo's pretty employee friendly and doesn't like to do crunch time. And then they did this a 3rd time with Strikers, and I remember everyone on Twitter was so hyped for this game because, oh my gosh guys, it's the return of Mario Strikers. But I knew frame 1 that this was going to be the same song and dance as the previous 2 times they did this, and what do you know? What do you know? And nobody cares about it anymore. And I'm glad people actually go out of their way to criticize this practice. However, whenever another one of these sports games are announced, people go back into a hype state thinking it won't be the same case again. And then they get upset when they realize, oh, this game is mediocre and unfinished too. That's real nice. And it's one thing for this to just affect spin-off titles, but whenever this cheese pizza practice bleeds into big hitters, that's when things get personal. I have a lot of problems with Animal Crossing New Horizons. A lot of them stem from general gameplay changes that make it feel like less of a life sim and more of a town decorating game. But as if making this game more appealing to women wasn't a big enough sin, this game was freaking barren. On launch, it was quick to run out of new things to do, and the game was lacking features and facilities that were mainstays for the series that didn't get added till much later on. And even after all of the updates, it still feels like a lesser title than its predecessors and lacks the same soul they had. That is a personal, sentimental thing and not a genuine criticism, I understand. New Horizons is no exaggeration one of the best-selling video games of all time, and they couldn't even be bothered to continue supporting it for more than 2 years past launch, leaving this cash cow dead in the water. I've stated my piece on this game several times at this point, but I cannot understate how much this method of finishing the game later through post-launch updates hurt it. I still have some fond memories playing it with my friends, however the lack of so many features features that were present in prior entries eventually took me out of my immersion, and by the time those features were added, it was too late. There was one chance to capture the magic, and it blew it. Compare what New Horizons did to New Leaf and its Welcome Amiibo update that came out a few years after launch. New Leaf was already considered the best game in the series upon release. It was a completely finished game, and I doubt anyone was complaining that there wasn't enough to do in it for a $40 3DS title. Then they add in this huge content update for free, and well, not all of it is accessible without Amiibo, which yeah, those do cost money. But it was a cool addition regardless, and I was still playing New Leaf semi-regularly anyway before the update came out. Meanwhile, I haven't touched New Horizons in ages, and I don't think I care enough to move my island over to my new Switch. I just really don't want to do it. However, the example of this that hurts me the most is with Splatoon. Allow me to explain. Splatoon was the pioneer of this post-content release system. It was you! You're the source of all of my problems! For those of you who weren't there, Splatoon at launch was like a McDonald's chicken nugget. It was very good, but very dry. It had story mode and turf war and... So because of that lack of content, Nintendo had this great idea of making the game actually worth $60. They added ranked modes, new weapons and maps, and within a few months the game felt significantly bigger than it was before. This system actually worked. When Splatoon 2 was first released, it had a very solid amount of new content, and yet they still kept providing free updates for new weapons, maps, the X-Rank, Clan Blitz, new sub and special weapons. They even released the Octo expansion, the DLC story, and while that was $20, it was perfectly justified considering how much free content had been given to us prior. Some would say Splatoon 3 was almost unnecessary considering how well 2 was holding up for a 5-year-old game, but I was still cool with a third game because it was a good opportunity to get something fresher with new mechanics, a new story mode, and a new world. And I was excited to experience it and watch as it flourished over time, just like its two predecessors, and they screwed it up. They almost completely screwed it up. This was the one game series that did finish it later correctly, and then this game completely botched it. The main difference between how Splatoon 3 handles its post-launch updates in comparison to the other two games is that the updates are bigger but more infrequent. We're talking once a season infrequent here, not including patches to buff and nerf weapons. That's 4 updates a year. And the thing is, the time it takes to get one in comparison to the content provided isn't really worth the wait. So here's the thing, unlike the other two games, I actually got really into the competitive side of this game and even went so far as to get into S Plus in the first 2 seasons and even Trial X battles, which I never thought I'd get to do and I wish I didn't. But whenever those first 2 updates rolled around, I played them for a few days, then I dropped the game once again. Because what happens is the meta ends up boiling down to a few specific weapons, and those 2 or 3 weapons, they will completely overtake ranked, and after a while, games just get repetitive. It doesn't help that the people making these weapon kits will just produce the most asinine cooking that could get you arrested, but then for 2 weapons that are already good by themselves, they get turned into Little Timmy mode. So all of this other stuff barely matters outside of niche cases, and most of online is going to be comprised of the same 2 weapon compositions. Meanwhile, new weapon types such as the Splatana Wiper only had 1 kit until almost 9 months after launch. Imagine being a Wiper main like me and having to be stuck with Ultra Stamp as your only option for a special for well over half a year. Either that or you have to play Stamper, which has a very different playstyle. And by the way, that weapon still hasn't gotten a second kit. Now, of course, I'm going to play around with the other weapons because they're fun too, but is it so much to ask for, I don't know, more than 1 sub and special combo for my favorite weapon type? There are countless other problems with the game, such as maps being extremely hit and miss, the poor implementation of the league mode, and the very clear bias towards shooter weapons, but that in itself could be its own video. All I want from this game is just a few weapons a month. Heck, maybe even 1 could spice things up for a little while and keep me invested. No update post-launch had me sink even a quarter as much playtime as I did back whenever it first came out, and I don't want to be so negative about Splatoon 3 because I still really like it. I still think this is the most fun I've ever had with Splatoon, and in several ways it's undoubtedly the best game in the series. However, it's been horribly mishandled, and it sucks to say that about a game that deserves so much better and by all means shouldn't have these problems. I think I'll probably come back again once the DLC drops, and on a side note, I think it's dumb that the stupid Inkopolis hub world is bundled with the new story campaign because I don't care about Inkopolis and Splatsville is the best hub. You cannot fight me on this, and if you try to, then that makes you a pedophile. Nintendo really copy-pasted an old hub just to tack on $5 extra to this DLC. You know, the only good that ever did is help me transition into talking about why Tears of the Kingdom is overpriced. So even though this final part might seem extremely shoehorned in, Tears of the Kingdom was the whole inspiration for this video actually. I don't care enough about the game to give it its own video, but dude, that $70 price tag really set me off, and I knew from the very start that that game was never going to be worth that much. Because fun fact, while I don't think 60 is a terrible price point for games, I never really feel that satisfied paying that much for a game. And if you've listened to me for the past 10 minutes, then you probably know why I feel that way. Needless to say, charging $70 for a game that's a sequel to another game from 6 years ago and clearly reuses a lot of code and assets did not sit well with me. And the main reason I wanted to play the game was to see if it actually was worth $70 because I'm just that petty. Not that Tears of the Kingdom is actually bad or anything. However, it has a lot of problems that very few people are speaking out about. I think my main one being, despite the impressive programming and the creative things you can do with the new runes and whatnot, a lot of the world just feels the same. But Luggo, it's a sequel. Shut up, I don't care. It's a very similar world with very similar and repetitive tasks with barely any new enemy types, and anytime the game has the opportunity to innovate, it chooses not to. The Sky Islands are incredibly underdeveloped, with the tutorial section being the most in-depth one in the whole game, and it was really good. It was a great introduction that made me feel like this would be like a remixed version of Breath of the Wild with more unique locales, new enemies, and powers to work with. But after leaving, the game only feels like half of that and turns into this Breath of the Wild DLC, and at times I forgot I was supposed to be playing a new game and was going through the same motions I went through 6 years ago. And that's not a good thing at all to say about a sequel. Majora's Mask was a sequel that reused a ton of code and models from Ocarina of Time, but it did so much to differentiate itself and developed its own identity. Also, as far as I'm aware, it didn't cost more than its predecessor. Breath of the Wild will be remembered as a big new step for the series, while Tears of the Kingdom will eventually be remembered as Breath of the Wild, but more. So even though in several ways it's a better game, Breath of the Wild was a better experience for me. Don't get me wrong, there are several valid reasons why people will prefer this over Breath of the Wild, and I'm not here to change your mind and make you dislike it, but tell me this. Do you want another Zelda game like this? Do you want this to become the norm for the series? Because even if you don't feel the way I do, if Zelda really does continue down this path, then you'll eventually understand where I'm coming from. A lot of people online are asking how Nintendo could possibly top Tears of the Kingdom, and man, if this is the best they can offer, then I'm sorry, I just think that's kind of sad. But yeah, that's pretty much all of my problems with Nintendo summarized really quickly. They still have it in them to make some one-of-a-kind experiences, but they just don't wow me like they used to, and over time, their major flaws have become more and more pronounced. I still think they do plenty good, and I'm looking forward to some of their upcoming releases. Mario Wonder could be a creative spin on 2D Mario that the series desperately needs, and like I said, they're getting better about porting their old games, but it still hasn't been enough, and there are countless other issues that have yet to be addressed. So if you feel the same way I do, then branch out, try other games, and see what you've been missing out on. If Nintendo can't show me how great games can be anymore, then might as well look elsewhere. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Nintendo, and I will commend them whenever they knock it out of the park again, like I know they will at some point. However, it's because I care about them that I will criticize them, because I want them to make something truly special that'll blow me away like they've done several times in the past. So if all that said, Nintendo needs to go back to making good games and also port Fortune Street.